As a dungeon master during Dungeons & Dragons, there is nothing worse than boring combat. This is an issue that affects many different groups, and in turn it leads to entirely forgettable combat encounters, which then in turn leads to things like players being on their phones during sessions and during combat, slows everything down, and in the end it just turns into an absolute slog. So I'm going to give you 5 tips for Dungeons & Dragons combat that's going to help you spice up your sessions and keep your players hooked and engaged and looking forward to and excited for every single combat encounter that you run for them. My name's Aaron, welcome to the DM's Playbook, where we talk all things D&D with new videos every single Tuesday. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with us, but let's get straight into it. So, why is combat sometimes so boring? Well, for me there's 3 main components to that. The first one is that the combat itself is repetitive or static. It's not going anywhere. Nothing different is happening. This really tends to be the case for groups that have played together for quite a long time, so they're familiar with each other's styles, they know their characters super well, and everybody can kind of predict what's going to happen for the party, and the only variance is that sometimes monsters have different attacks. Now, the second of the 3 reasons is that the stakes are too low. The players don't feel like they have anything that's at risk, or that there's any repercussions if they don't smash these enemies. And then the third reason can be that there's a lack of direction. At some point, or at any point during the combat, if any of your players were to look at each other and ask each other, why are we actually involved in this fight? And any of them can answer it with a shrug, then something's going wrong. There needs to be direction to each combat. So how do we fix this? Well, we fix it using the 5 tips that I'm going to give you now. As well as these 5 tips, there's also one hardcore bonus tip at the end, which is going to help you really ramp up your players, and it's a guaranteed method to success in terms of keeping your players engaged during combat. Now, I want to get through the first 2 really quickly because they're super easy fixes that every DM can do regardless of your situation. Now, the first thing I want you to look at is your background music. This is the easiest one to fix, and it just fills silence so that there's no dead zones during your combat encounters. It also really helps your players build a mental image of what's going on in the game. Like, just think of all your favourite movies and TV shows. Almost all of them have iconic soundtracks, whether it's Lord of the Rings or whether it's Game of Thrones, The Avengers, Harry Potter, anything. They've all got iconic soundtracks that you recognise instantly. There's a reason that those soundtracks do so well with those movies or those shows. It's not coincidence. Soundtracks matter. It does take a bit of work, but I'm going to help you guys out by posting the playlists that I use, that I've created. They're going to be down in the description below the video, so check them out if you want somewhere to start. So that's a super easy one. Music will immediately help you step your game up when it comes to combat encounters. The second point is the objective. Super obvious, but how many times have you been involved in a combat where you don't really know what the objective is other than just to kill your enemy? That makes it so boring, and I'm not just on about the players either. Consider as the dungeon master, when you're playing as a monster, do they need to stay in this combat for a reason? Is there a reason why they're involved in this fight, or have they just bumped into the players? If they've just bumped into the players and they're losing the fight badly, why would they hang around? Almost every monster or almost every creature would have that self-preservation mindset where if they feel like they're going to die, they're going to run, they're going to leave. So that can help you avoid those combats where it's everybody knows where this is going. The players are obviously going to kill the monster, but it's just a case of going through the motions until the monster is at 0 hit points. No, if it's got to that point where the players are definitely going to win, just eliminate it. The monster runs away. They can then give chase if they want to, or they can let it go if they decide that the combat has gone a bit stagnant, and then you can move on with your session. Now, this next tip for me is probably the most important one on this list, and it's one that's really helped me take my game to the next level as a DM. And I refer to this as the flow of combat. Now, the way I think of this is during combat, you need to anchor each player in the scene at the start of their turn. So the way you do that is by explaining to them what they see and then asking them what they do. Sounds super simple, right? Because it is. It's really simple. It only takes a couple of seconds to do, but it will help you improve your combat scenarios so much. Let's say you're in a combat. Your fighter goes first. They attack the goblin, hit. The goblin goes next. They attack the fighter, miss. Then there's another goblin hidden in the trees, who fires an arrow at the ranger of the party, misses. Now the 4th individual to come up is this ranger. So how would you anchor them in the scene? Well, it's really simple. Describe to them what they've seen. Ranger, you see your fighter rush the goblin, sword out in front of them, as the 2 engage in hand-to-hand combat. You then hear an arrow whistle through the trees towards you, and you duck just in time to avoid it. Looking in the direction from when it came, you see another goblin, perched up in a tree, knocking another arrow to his bow. What do you want to do? It makes the combat feel alive, rather than just saying, okay, fighter, you swung, you hit. Goblin attacks you, it hits. Other goblin fires an arrow at your ranger, misses. Ranger, what do you want to do? It's completely different. It changes up the flow of the combat and it makes it feel so much more immersive, and your players will be more drawn in. Now, my next tip is to optimize your enemies. Ask your players if they are fighting goblins or whether they're fighting gnolls or orcs. Does it all feel kind of the same? If they say yes, then that's because you as a DM need to do more to mix it up and need to add more flavour to your gameplay and the tactics and the way you approach each combat to make each individual monster feel like an individual monster. Mind Flayers fight differently to bugbears, who fight differently to orcs, who fight differently to goblins. Know your monsters when you're running a combat session with them. An example of how you could get to know them a little bit better, maybe check out the video that I did on goblins and how to run them effectively in combat. Again, I'll post that link in the description below this video, so if you're looking for inspiration for that, check out that video. That will give you a rundown of how I prepare each individual monster and look at what their tactics might be. But it's not just that. Also look at the environment. Look at where these monsters normally live or where they would normally hang around, and how would they use that environment to their advantage. Do they have a swimming speed? If they have a swimming speed, then it's likely that they would have a body of water somewhere nearby that they can take advantage of, but most player characters can't. Or maybe they can burrow. In which case, why don't they have a number of underground tunnels that enables them to get different vantage points throughout the combat, and they can disappear underground and reappear somewhere else. So make sure that you optimize your enemies before you fight with them. Now, my fifth tip is called Scene Evolution. And what I want you to do with this one is to change something about the combat every couple of rounds. You should never go 4 or 5 rounds with everything being the exact same as it was before. You've got a couple of different options for this. The first option, and the most obvious one, is probably the battleground. You can change the battleground. Now, whether that's something has caught fire, maybe somebody has cast firebolt or fireball, and now there's trees or buildings that are on fire, which create an extra hazard for them to beware of. Alternatively, maybe a crate or a barrel nearby has been broken. What spilled out of that crate or barrel? Maybe it's marbles, maybe it's oil, who knows? It could be anything that spills out of it. It's your choice. Maybe a third party enters the combat who's on neither side, neither the enemies nor the player character's side. Maybe there's a third party that enters the combat. Think of it, maybe you're in a forest and you're fighting, you've got goblins versus players, again the classic scenario, and then treants all of a sudden awaken and attack both the goblins and the player characters. How does that affect things? You could also switch up the opponents, so have reinforcements arrived, or maybe the opponent evolves in some way and becomes stronger in one way and weaker in another. Finally, you could switch the objective. Have the party got an NPC travelling with them? Well, would the monsters try and take that NPC as a hostage or a slave? Change the objective from just hitting each other until somebody dies to something that's dynamic and something that evolves and changes as the combat continues. Now I've come to the bonus tip for you guys, if you really want to ramp it up. Before I get to it, remember to like and subscribe the video, really helps me out. But here is that bonus tip. Set a timer for your players. Now this timer doesn't have to be something that's overly harsh. You could maybe set a 2-minute timer, so for each player's turn they have 2 minutes to pick and choose what it is that they want to do. It's plenty of time. They know their character, they know what they can do, what they can't do, they know their spells. 2 minutes should be plenty of time for everybody to decide what they want to do and enforce that action. However, what it does do is it means that when it's not their turn, they're paying attention to what's happening in the combat. And the reason for this is because they don't want to get to the start of their turn and have to waste time asking everybody, oh, so what's happened? Is it my turn? What did you just do? How can I affect that? No, they'll be paying attention so that when it comes to their turn, they know exactly what they want to do. This will also really help speed up your combat encounters, which will stop them from becoming stagnant and boring. Think about this as well. How many times do you see it in movies where a character has an objective that they're trying to fulfill, and then to up the tension and up the ante and the drama, the directors or the producers, whoever's designed the movie, has decided to enforce a time limit on it? Happens all the time. And that's because it works. So you can use that as a dungeon master as well. And what happens if a player character gets to the end of their time limit and they haven't taken their action? Well, in-game, their player just hesitated and didn't know what to do. Over time, you can really crank the pressure up on this by bringing that time limit down. So again, you could start off at 2 minutes, and once everybody's kind of gotten used to this and everybody's comfortable in it, switch it up, make it 1 minute. Really up the tension. And my advice is I wouldn't try all of those tips. I wouldn't try implementing all of them at once. I'd maybe master 2 or 3 and then just add to them as you progress through. But if I had to pick, then the main ones that I would include to start off with would be background music, objective, and flow of combat. Start with those 3 or 2 of those 3 and you can't go wrong. Now, I'd love to hear your opinion on this and the tips that I've given. Let me know in the comments what you think. Maybe you disagree with me, maybe you agree with me. Also, consider sharing it with your DM friends if you think that it could help them out to run better combat scenarios. Throw me a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to make sure that you catch all of the stuff that we've got coming out soon. Thank you for watching. Be good, guys.